YCore videos on fundraising. If we haven't met yet, my name is Jess and I'm YCore's Executive Director. These videos are going to walk you through some of the content that we think is helpful for YCore fellows embarking on their fundraising. And in this video, we're covering the basics, getting on the same page about what a nonprofit is and why it's important to fundraise for them. So we all know more or less what a nonprofit is, but oftentimes when we're asked to actually define the word, we're not completely sure. The reality is that nonprofit is just an org with a 501c tax status. They don't have to pay taxes to the government because they've demonstrated that they fit a certain mission-driven criteria. Nonprofits are governed by a board rather than owned like a business, and in exchange for not paying taxes, they have to disclose their finances to the public in a form called a 990. So why is that important? Why do we need organizations focused on mission rather than profit? Well, we have massive social equity problems, and the most effective, systemic, and compassionate solutions won't always be lucrative. So whether or not you believe in capitalism as a positive force, I think we can all agree that capitalism is not set up to solve issues of equity. Government, too, is somewhat limited in what it's able to do. There are lots of perspectives on what government should and should not be responsible for, but in our current society, it's not set up to take on the challenges that we're facing with the sort of nimbleness and flexibility that we need. Nonprofits exist to fill in these gaps. As you know, nonprofits don't get funded in the same way for-profits do. Many nonprofits charge fees for service, and in the sector as a whole, that accounts for about 48% of funding. But not all nonprofits have access to things like fees for service. Many nonprofits get government contracts, and those tend to go to education, media, healthcare, but most nonprofits rely heavily on giving to fund their programming. And individual donations make up 68% of all charitable donations in the US. But there's a challenging thing about individual donations, which is that a lot of individuals have kind of skewed expectations for how the nonprofit sector should work. We shared a really great article about this in the video description, but I'm also going to show an example of what I mean here. This represents how for-profit companies spend their money. You can see this latte that less than half of the price that you pay goes to direct costs. So that's the water, the beans, the barista, the cup. Most of that price goes to the coffee company for things like marketing and research and executive salaries and bonuses. And this is something that in our society we are mostly okay with when it comes to for-profit businesses. We figure that they earned it by making a product that we want, and what we're willing to pay for it, they should be able to get. For nonprofits, this picture looks really different because no matter how much the clients of a nonprofit need or want their services, they can't afford to pay full price. So because customers can't pay the full cost of services, nonprofits need to rely on donations and grants, as we talked about earlier. But while individual customers don't pay as much attention to where their coffee revenue goes, individual donors care a lot about what happens to their donated money. You've probably heard the term overhead, which refers to the costs of operating outside of the direct cost of the product. So in a coffee shop, this would be things like the lighting bill, the chairs and the tables, rent, the salary for their marketing team. There's an expectation in the nonprofit world that donors should only pay for the direct services rather than the overhead. That might sound reasonable at first, but what we're saying is that donors only want to pay for the coffee in the cup, maybe the barista, but not the marketing or the office space or the strategy or research. This is a big deal because without these things, it's incredibly difficult for an org to do things like measure their impact, improve their services, and grow. So when we fundraise as external folks, we are directly building capacity for nonprofits. Nonprofits spend a lot of their time fundraising already for those baseline activities like the coffee and the cup. So when other people come in, we're not only directly contributing to their staff time and capacity, we're also giving them more of an ability to focus on things like impact and strategy and growth. However you personally feel about fundraising, and I know that there can be some complicated thoughts about that, If you care about nonprofits, it's a really important tool to have in your toolbox.